Hello and welcome. My name is Christian Jax Johnson. I have a Bachelor of Arts and Science at the Evergreen State College. When you look at my title, the first instinct might be, that's provocative and controversial, tripping teens for a brighter future. But by the end of this, you'll understand how modern psychedelic rites of passage could create more resilient individuals and coherent societies. I'll start this with an eco-narrative of my life. Because of my early experiences in childhood and adolescence, my interest in youth and psychedelics blossomed. I was born in Montesano and raised in the Wainuchi Valley, which is in the southern foothills of the Olympic Mountains, where there's rainforest and timber farms all around. In early childhood, I was filled with a sense of wonder and awe and oneness with nature, impressed by forest ecology, but I was also oblivious to local human legacies, such as the ecological destruction and indigenous genocide and culturicide, globally and locally. In middle childhood, I began to change my relationship with nature, seeing it more as my friend and my resource. As I became literate and enculturated with religion in school, the distance between how I saw myself in nature grew. Then something awful happened in my life. I came home from school one day, and the home forest behind my house was completely gone, logged and completely destroyed. This devastated me. Later, I realized that what I experienced was called solastalgia. This is the experience of extreme pain, grief, confusion, and anger, the sense of loss that comes with having your home ecosystem destroyed or being taken from it. This rearranged my identity and social constructs. In adolescence, a few friends and I found and ate Liberty Cap mushrooms, Psilocybe semelanceata. This awakening on psychedelic mushrooms gave me a renewed sense of wonder and awe for nature, but also brought into focus the epiphany of the human condition, the fact that we destroy ecosystems and each other, which are our life support systems. So this created a sense of ontological shock where my beliefs and my idea of reality was shooken to its core. So why is it that adolescents are driven to change their consciousness, like with psychoactive consumption? Part of this is risk-taking and novelty-seeking, and a biological drive for social connection. And it can also be that it's a search for transcendence, meaning, and personal identity. And Cushman posited that it comes from an inner emptiness in modern society, that our compulsion to consume that creates confusion and alienation is because we don't have a structured society that allows us to feel full and have ontological stability. In this sense, the pathology of psychoactive consumption has replaced the initiation rites of traditional cultures. Here's a map of the illicit drug use in the last month among 12 to 17-year-olds. So it's averaged at about 10% across the nation for teens, and this includes methamphetamines, opiates, prescription drugs, and psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline, as well as cocaine and other substances. Here's a study from Statista from 2017 that through surveying across all 50 states and the District of Columbia for hallucinogen use among high school students, we see that they've separated this by male and female, as well as by ethnicity. And it's common that males use hallucinogens more than females, and as well as white and Hispanic use more than black and all ethnicities. So this is substances such as the classic psychedelics, like LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, and DMT, and they also included PCP, which I would consider more of a dissociative anesthetic. So when we talk about psychedelics in this paper, I'm going to refer to those classic psychedelics as mentioned because there is a lot of ambiguity around that term. And when we talk about psychoactives, we're talking about the general mind and mood altering substances. So, what is ontological insecurity and disorientation? Well, ontology is the attempt to understand the nature of existence and being, and so the insecurity is a constant questioning of the nature of reality and one's place in it. This is common in adolescence, where we're trying to understand our place and the world around us and fit into it. Well, this ontological insecurity has been shown in youth to be connected to the global rise in mental health disorders and to vulnerability to psychosis and drug misuse. So, in traditional cultures, they actually leverage this ontological insecurity in this time by using rites of passage. Rites of passage are rituals marking a life transition. In adolescence, it's often seen as the death of the child and the rebirth into adulthood. This is through a strict social and cultural structuring that fortifies the eco-psychosocial well-being of the individual and helps them into their adult life so they can better survive and bond into the community. I've introduced the term now, eco-psychosocial well-being. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. This is the healthy interrelationships between an individual's psyche, nature, and society. I consider it the pool of resilience, that if you, at a younger age, develop this healthy interrelationship, that your pool grows in depth and breadth. And in this way, you can be more resilient to stress and challenges and existential experiences as they come up through adolescence and adulthood. This is related to what Passmore developed as the eco-existential positive psychology. This is the understanding that as we become more connected with nature, that it helps with the 6 existential anxieties of identity, happiness, isolation, finding meaning in life, freedom, and death. Traditional rites of passage with psychoactive plant medicines is common throughout the world. Here are some examples of tribes that use psychoactives in this important time for this life transition. The Amazonian tribes in ayahuasca, the Australian Aboriginals in Paturi, the Fang of Gabon and Iboga, the Chumash of California and the Shangana Songa of Mozambique both use datura, and the Huichol people of Mexico use peyote. And now we have modern pseudo-rites of passage with psychoactive drugs in our current society. For example, with ayahuasca neotribalism, we see that more and more groups in the West are embracing ayahuasca as a community and a way to harness their own intent at building a spiritual life in a community. And some adults are choosing to give children and adolescents ayahuasca as a separate educational experience, separate from the larger culture. There's also many examples of the peyote use in different tribal society where it's not exactly traditional use, but the Native American church and other communities encourage adolescents use this to help form their identity. There's also more unstructured experiences like LSD and the Grateful Dead, where young people go to concerts and have mind-bending, mood-altering, completely melting experiences, and that reforms their identity in a new community. There's also a lot of psilocybin mushrooms with friends, and that use is just like what I experienced as an adolescent. And Newson in 2021 did a study showing that with MDMA and raves, it creates a sense of social connectivity and social positivity within that group. However, unlike rites of passage in traditional cultures, these are missing an eco-psychosocial component that's very structured, and these fragmented and unstructured patterns can lead to alienation from family or social groups or other potential psychopathologies. And what are some of the challenges facing modern youth today? Well, in short, less time outdoors and social media combined with that equals a decreased resilience and well-being. And with an uncertain future and economic instability, it's no wonder that youth have a lot of anxiety and depression. There's also the accounting for artificial intimacy. As we spend more and more time online, it becomes normalized to experience this intimacy that isn't really intimacy. It doesn't replace it, but it gives people a sense of connectedness without giving them the actual feeling of intimacy. So this brings us to the problem, which is the absence of eco-psychosocial identity development. What is missing with youth today are unifying rituals to construct in-group identities and nurturing eco-psychosocial well-being through these rituals. These self-transcendent experiences that happen as rites of passage help youth create in-group identities that are stronger and more cohesive and helps them develop individual resilience as well. So what could be the solution? Modern psychedelic rites of passage could create the resilience and social cohesion that is so needed at this time. To leverage adolescent ontological insecurity, we would need structured initiation into adulthood, just like traditional cultures. This fast-paced educational experience and self-transcendence prepares a child for adulthood, and the eco-psychosocial component brings awareness to the ecological health, the psychological health, and the social health being completely interconnected. And now you might be thinking, whoa, slow down. Are we going to give adolescents psychedelics? Well, a lot of them already take it without our permission. But you're exactly right. There are major considerations when we talk about adolescent psychedelic interventions in today's world. Like, what are some of the potential risks to physiological and cognitive development? What are some of the potential benefits? What are some ethical considerations around informed consent? And what are some of the hurdles to the regulatory frameworks so that we can actually do safety and efficacy studies? Starting with the risks to physiological and cognitive development, there are some studies, but there's not many, and we need more. The most recent is Simonson in 2024, and they found that there was a lower risk of psychosis with youth that take psychedelics, but a higher risk of mania for those that are genetically vulnerable. And there's recent psilocybin studies that include adults ages 18 to 25, and it's important to point out that this is the later stage of cognitive development, when the pruning and the circuitry for the prefrontal cortex is still being formed. And some of the most important studies around psychedelics with youth are the ayahuasca experiences that youth have in the Brazilian churches in context with part indigenous and part modern, such as the Une de Vegetal, the UDV, and that's where these studies take place, where they looked at the neuropsychological health of youth that take ayahuasca up to twice a month. And they did find that there's no current evidence of harm from ayahuasca to memory and learning when compared to the controls. What are some of the potential benefits? Well, De Silveira and these ayahuasca studies in Brazil also found that there's less anxiety, body dysmorphism, and ADD symptoms from the controls. And they found in another study that there's more confidence, optimism, they're more outgoing, energetic, and reflective, and tend to be more connected to their families. And in a more recent study by Dobkin de Rios, in 2011, they found that these youth tend to be more responsible, respectful, considerate, and bonded to their families. So all of these give us the takeaway that there is a need for more studies. There doesn't seem to be a risk of immediate harm, and there are potential benefits. And when we talk about the regulatory considerations, we can also look to Brazil, because in the Brazilian Civil Code, there was in 2004 resolution number 5 made, and this showed there's a lack of sufficient scientific evidence and that ayahuasca has been used for centuries and has not shown damaging health effects. So they've decided that this is an exercise of parental rights and the freedom of religious belief and practice and its interpretation of the rights of children and adolescents. So pregnant women, children, and adolescents, with the parental consent, can take ayahuasca legally in Brazil. And when we talk about some of the ethical considerations around informed consent, it's important to note that psychedelic experiences can be challenging and or catalyzing, and they cannot be adequately translated through language or symbol. How do you explain and give consent to someone about an ineffable experience with words failing you? One thing we can do, which Rajwani pointed out, is that we can form an enhanced consent that's considerate of these specific risks, the autonomy and privacy. And it's important to note that capable youth are already allowed to take life-changing risks, such as driving, sexual experiences, extreme sports, and so forth. And it's important to note once again that in Brazil, there is a precedent for this. The right of pregnant women and children to consume ayahuasca, it falls under the domain of the exercise of parental rights. So how do we leverage ontological insecurity? We need to develop eco-psychosocial habits for our young people, utilize that window of opportunity and growth when their brains are pruning and they're developing new circuits. We can curate pro-social and pro-environmental identity development at this time, understanding that life satisfaction and social cohesion are the same thing. So an actionable solution in this regard could be a multidisciplinary study designed to measure safety and efficacy of modern psychedelic rites of passage for adolescents, to emphasize the eco-psychosocial development. Ideally, this would be a longitudinal study, cross-cultural, and involve integrative measures such as family, religion, and school integrated into this. And this should include a battery of neuropsychological assessments. So in conclusion, we have an unprecedented adolescent mental health crisis, and we need novel solutions for this. And we know that psychoactive abuse is a symptom of inner emptiness. And we know that the eco-psychosocial identity disconnect comes from this emptiness. So now the solution: modern psychedelic rites of passage can restore a vital developmental window in this society. And by nurturing the eco-psychosocial well-being, we can build more resilient individuals and coherent societies. To do this, we combine the roots of indigenous wisdom with the fruits of scientific advancement. For after all, we're all on the same tree of life. Thank you for coming to my talk today. I'd like to acknowledge James Hosobe, who was my talk coach in psychedelics, and it's been a wonderful experience, and I want to thank all of the Intercollegiate Psychedelic Network staff and Brittany Malaya for helping me review and curate this work. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talks.